Welcome to this side event on human rights and climate justice, from the people to the highest court. I'd like to welcome you all. We have an amazing panel with us. I have to unfortunately start out with an apology that the president of Vanuatu has taken ill, will be leaving the country, in fact, today, and so he, unfortunately, His Excellency could not join us today, but we, of course, have a very high-level representative to be with us on the panel. We have this side event and this COP27 in a period, just in this year alone, where we have witnessed and experienced back-to-back devastating climate impacts. And of course, these impacts have clear connections to the impacts on the rights of people. Whether that is the right to life, whether that is the right to livelihood, whether that is the right to food, to water, to security, to home, to culture. Clearly, climate change has a direct impact on the rights of people. And, as we know, has the most impact and burdens on those who are most vulnerable, who are most marginalized, and especially in the global south. And so, this very important initiative, led by Vanuatu to get an advisory opinion in the International Court of Justice, will bring immense certainty for all of us, and especially for governments, about climate change, human rights, and the obligations and responsibilities, especially in relation to the implementation of the Paris Agreement around that. It will bring clarity. There are many treaties, of course, in place, human rights treaties, the Paris Agreement as a climate treaty, and what we need to do to be able to increase the ambition, especially on the implementation of the Paris Agreement. This advisory opinion will bring that. So certainly this is a conversation that we need to have collectively. We're really pleased that this initiative was in fact driven by young people, by students in the Pacific, and then we've had the amazing leadership of Vanuatu, the government of Vanuatu, who took up the issue and led on this together with the support of many, not only other governments, but certainly civil society. So we're very proud to be hosting this side event where we can open up the conversation about why this advisory opinion is so critical. It can potentially, of course, be a game changer, what it means for all of us as different stakeholders and partners in the process. And so clearly, it is timely because it's going to be delivered, the resolution will be delivered in the UN General Assembly pretty soon. So with that, I'm particularly privileged that we have a wonderful panel that's going to have this conversation with us. I'll introduce each panelist in turn, but I will start out with the President's special advisor, who will represent the President at the side event, Dr. Christopher Bartlett. So, Dr. Bartlett, you are welcome to make your remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Colleagues, first of all, let me express the deep regret of His Excellency Vurobaravu. We just had to put him in the vehicle to take him back. He took unwell, and he was so much looking forward to seeing you all today. Because the reason that Vanuatu has taken this initiative is very much because of you in civil society. It was students from the University of the South Pacific that in 2018 came to the government of Vanuatu and said, we have a transformational pathway to bring accountability to the climate crisis. And we listened with interest, and they lobbied, and they explained. And in 2019, Vanuatu took young people's ideas to the Pacific Island Forum Leaders Meeting, where we raised the idea. And the leaders said, that's quite interesting, tell us more. And it was this year, in 2022, when Vanuatu convinced not only the leaders of the Pacific, but the leaders of the Caribbean and the leaders of Africa, that this is the time to bring legal clarity to the question of addressing the climate emergency. The Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC is only one treaty to which parties have ratified to commit to action on climate change. But it is only one. Across the world, we have ratified dozens of international laws which hold legally binding obligations on states to prevent harm. The intention of this initiative is to ask the International Court of Justice, which is the United Nations principal organ responsible for legal issues, to give that clarity about how the obligations that exist already under international law can be brought to bear directly on the climate crisis and be brought to bear to this process at COP. Why is it that we have been negotiating for 30 plus years to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere and prevent dangerous harm to people? And you go to any country on this planet and people are suffering. It's not just the small island developing states. It's not just the least developed countries. It is every nation on this planet. How can we continue to break those obligations to protect people and protect environments just because we're blinded by the one convention on climate change which has voluntary commitments? And this is what the International Court of Justice can do, is bring international law together in a consistent and coherent way so that when we come to COP, we're not talking about these legally binding, non-negotiable issues, but we're getting down to business of addressing the climate crisis. Vanuatu has spent about a year going around the world, bringing on board countries to support this initiative. And I'm so pleased that there are now 18 nations who have been working for the last 6 months to draft the resolution, which will go to the UN General Assembly and then on to the International Court of Justice. We have 18 nations from the Caribbean, from Latin America, from Africa, from the Pacific, from Asia, and from Europe. And I would particularly like to thank our partners from the developed world, from the highest emitting states, from those most responsible for the climate change crisis, for coming on board and recognizing that this is not about dividing the world, that this is about bringing us together under the one issue that we all agree, and that is protecting human rights. It is very unusual for a country to say, we will not support an initiative that protects people and human rights. And if we started the discussion on climate change with people, I think we would be in a very different place than we are today. We are not measuring the climate crisis in tons of carbon or degrees of Celsius. We are measuring the climate crisis in human lives. This initiative has now a 0 draft resolution from these 18 countries. It was agreed yesterday by the core countries in New York. Today at 4:00 p.m., the ambassadors of the 18 countries will meet and sign off on the resolution. It will go through one final approval at capital level over the weekend, and by Monday next week, we expect that this draft, 0 draft resolution will be uploaded onto the delegate portal of the United Nations General Assembly, accessible to all UN member states. What happens next is we will go through a process of informal consultations with all states This means that even countries that perhaps don't feel the need to have legal clarification will be able to submit their ideas and suggestions on the question. Middle of December, we propose to close the consultation process and then put the resolution on the floor of the General Assembly for a vote. And you're applauding, and I think that applause really belongs to you in civil society. I cannot say how important civil society has been throughout this process. I am convinced that those 18 core group members who've joined us in the last 6 months have largely been pressured by people, their constituents, and the civil society movement on climate justice, which is what we've all been demanding since the beginning of this crisis. The resolution itself contains a question on the legal obligations of states under international law. It also contains a provision that the court will clarify the consequences when states have caused significant harm to the climate system, to human rights, and we've also added the element of youth, future generations, and intergenerational equity. These provisions directly came from the demands and requests of civil society. So these governments have heard your voices and are now moving to transform the climate decision-making system to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. What will happen once the International Court of Justice receives this request from the General Assembly is that they will open a process whereby all UN member states can come to the court and provide evidence, submissions, and plead their case. This is an opportunity for civil society to get very actively involved at the International Court of Justice. Unlike the process in where we sit today, where only state parties have a voice, and even then, not quite in a participatory way, at the International Court of Justice, the judges want to hear the perspective of people. In the past, advisory opinions have brought those most affected by the issues, for example, the case of denuclearization, in the case of decolonization, they have brought people who have directly been affected. And that's where civil society is going to make the difference in the advisory opinion that comes out of the ICJ. We're going to need to mobilize every nation on earth to be at the court, to be well prepared, to understand the obligations that states already have under law and make those representations to the ICJ. The process could take up to 2 years. But we're confident that by the end of 2024, we will have a very, very clear indication of what are the non-negotiable obligations of states to protect people, human rights, and the environment from climate change. And what that means is we can come to the next COP and we can get past all of the stalemate that is unnecessary and start to address how we can see real solutions. Vanuatu is the first country to truly embody the type of ambition that can result as a part of this advisory opinion. Our nationally determined contribution to the UNFCCC, to the Paris Agreement, is not just about mitigation. If you read this NDC, it puts people at the very heart of climate change commitments. There is an entire section in this NDC, in fact, the largest section is on adaptation and resilience and human rights. There is an entire section on loss and damage commitments by the Republic of Vanuatu. And of course, we've made some of the highest ambition commitments in the world. 100% renewable energy in the electricity generation sector by 2030. This is the type of ambition that all states need to bring to this UNFCCC process, and they can only do so if we get clarity on state obligations. I'd also like to thank civil society for helping Vanuatu along a path of climate leadership in other spaces. You may have heard that in September of this year, the President, His Excellency Vurobaravu, announced at the United Nations General Assembly opening that Vanuatu is now calling for the development of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. It is not enough to talk about His Excellency made it clear that it is not enough to talk about the emissions only. You have to address the source, the root, the problem of those emissions. And that means phasing out the production of fossil fuels. Vanuatu has also called on the International Criminal Court to criminalize the crime of ecocide. This would be new international law. The crime of ecocide would set the boundaries of what is acceptable and not acceptable by states in terms of their relationship with the environment. In addition, we are continuing to champion the cause of human rights and young people across the Pacific, across the world, in the way that we engage at the Human Rights Council in Geneva and at the General Assembly in New York. So please count on Vanuatu as your strongest ally for climate justice, and we very much look forward to continuing the incredible partnerships that we've had with civil society going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, is this on? Thank you very much. I mean, that is so inspiring and really desperately needed in this space, especially at COP27, where we certainly are pushing very strongly the message that there can be no climate justice without human rights. So thank you very much for Vanuatu's leadership in this regard. And I'd like to now introduce to you, and doesn't need any introduction, a wonderful, courageous, brave, dedicated leader, Vanessa Nakate. You would have followed her, I'm sure, and are following her and her work that she's doing across the world, and especially the work that she does in challenging the powers that be about the actions or the lack of actions that they're taking, and of course very inspiring. So Vanessa, you've heard what Christopher said, the intention of this advisory opinion. It would be really good to hear from you, especially the part that is referred to. What are the implications, of course, for young people, but for intergenerational equity and the moral voice of young people in relation to that? What does this mean for young people, especially?
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to join this incredible group of human rights and climate justice leaders. Of course, I am not a legal expert. I am a 25-year-old Ugandan climate justice activist. So I will share what I know and what I've seen with my own eyes. In early September, I spent a few days with UNICEF in Turkana County in the Horn of Africa to meet with people who are suffering from the historic drought that is wreaking havoc on communities there. Turkana County and other parts of Africa, of the Horn of Africa, have suffered 4 consecutive failed rainy seasons. The drought is killing the crops, there is no pasture for the livestock, and water sources are drying up everywhere. Forecasts suggest that the next rains are likely to fail as well. The ongoing emergency in the Horn of Africa is depriving children of clean, fresh water, of food, of their livelihoods, and access to life-saving health services. It is keeping children from the classroom and forcing their families to move. The climate crisis is not robbing them of their futures. It is robbing them of their present. It is robbing them of their very survival. And over those days, I spent time with people who have done literally nothing to create the climate crisis, but who are suffering its worst impacts. I spent time with moms who are desperately trying to keep their children alive, trying to find food and water to sustain their families' lives for another week, another day, another hour. I spent time with their children who are clinging to life. But I do want to tell you about one of the people I had the chance to meet while I was in Turkana County in the Horn of Africa. I met a young boy in a hospital where the worst cases of severe acute malnutrition are referred and treated. It was devastating for me to see, especially when there are available solutions that can be put in place to stop children from suffering like this. Unfortunately, this child's family was not able to access the proper services in time for him to receive the treatment that he needed. And by the time the sun set that evening, sadly, he had passed away. This is one story about how the climate crisis is affecting people all around the world, especially in the global south. People are losing their lives, and maybe we can have a moment of silence for all those that we have lost as a result of the climate crisis. So this is the face of the climate crisis. The climate crisis is not something distant. It is not a future threat. It is happening right now. It is already here, and the impacts will only grow more destructive, and more children will continue to suffer. More families will continue to be destroyed. More girls will continue to be forced into early marriages. More women will continue to be exposed to gender-based violence if we do not do something about this. Why I find this effort to secure an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice so powerful. And as you've heard, this was an initiative that was started by young people, and that will help secure justice and human rights for all the generations still to come. This initiative was created by young people, law students, who were so outraged by the inaction of their elected leaders that they had to find another way forward. These young leaders are clearing a path all the way to the highest court in the world. This is a courageous effort to secure a decision that will force leaders to act, to be accountable to the law, to protect future generations from the climate impacts that are coming. There is so much that young people are doing. There is so much that young people have been doing for so many years, trying to find a future, trying to secure a present. All we want is to be listened to. All we want is action, because it's devastating to see what is happening in our communities. Some of us are being asked why we've attended COP27, and yet our fellow activists, some from Europe, have not attended. They're trying to find a way to say, why are we here when the ones in Europe have not attended? But we have no other choice. Activists from the Global South have no other choice. We have to use every platform that we can to ensure that our voices are listened to. We have to use all platforms to ensure that our stories are listened to, because people in our communities are suffering. People in our communities are dying. People in our communities, they don't know what next for their future, because the present is catastrophic. But when you compare us with the decisions of some of our fellow activists from the global north, it is unfair, it is unjust, it is colonial as well, it is racist, because for us, we have no choice. We have no choice but to fight. We have no choice but to have hope, because people are suffering right now, and we need to protect what we have. We need to protect the access to food. For so many people, the climate crisis means just an extra heat that they can fix with an air conditioner. But for people in Turkana, the climate crisis means that they cannot access food, they cannot access water. The people in Pakistan, the climate crisis means over 1,500 people dying. It means over 33 million people being impacted by the flooding. The people in Nigeria that are suffering as a result of the floods. For us, we live the climate crisis. We don't have the privilege of just learning about the climate crisis. Our communities live this crisis. It has been lived by so many of us, and it's devastating. It is frustrating. We need action. We need true leadership from our leaders, and we need you to do something about this. We need our leaders to listen to the most affected people, to the most affected areas, and we need you to stop comparing us with our fellow activists from Europe, because for us, we have no choice but to come. We have no choice but to speak up. We have no choice but to fight, because if we don't fight for our present, what kind of future are we going to walk into? And here at COP27, I share the frustration of so many young people, young climate activists. We are constantly being invited. We give so many speeches. We do lots of interviews, but now we want our leaders to do action. Many times we've been told that we are inspiring. We inspire our leaders to take action, but now we don't want to inspire them. We want our leaders to inspire us, because we've been inspiring them for so long. I don't know what else is there to say. I don't know which words are left to inspire our leaders to act. I don't know what young people can do anymore to hold our leaders accountable, but we continue to do what we can. I say, let the gavel fall, let judges inspire our leaders to act, and let justice be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for that. Let justice be done. And let the power of people ensure that justice gets done. And then let the power of the courts ensure that justice gets done. And so we are really pleased and privileged to have with us the Secretary General of Amnesty International, Agnès Callamard. I hope I pronounced, I'm not very good at French, but you'll forgive me, who will now talk about why this advisory opinion is critical for embedding more strongly and more clearly the issue of human rights within the climate change framework and action. So I invite you to please address us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for Vanessa, for her leadership, and to you all, to give us this honor to be here with you today. Tough terrain lies ahead for rights holders and for human rights. A world of change on the back of a world of inequality, driving a world of contestation, teetering on descent into a world of conflict. Multiple mercurial trends intertwining and entangling globally, killing people. An unchecked climate crisis, destroying habitat, species, livelihood, and people, straining countries in every region, embedding food insecurity, driving resource conflict, and forcing mass displacement, likely generating more pandemics. Today and tomorrow, we live in a world of turmoil. Its unfamiliarity and unpredictability, its strains, its imposed, and the widespread anxiety it generates, sees people the world over divided, sometimes disillusioned, with many deeply and loudly angry and seeking answers. A mismatch growing between what is principled, universal, and what certain groups want us to believe, and what certain governments choose to peddle, just as a mismatch grows. And we can see that mismatch right here, outside those doors, between what we should be expecting and what too many governments are willing to deliver. For Amnesty International, there is only one acceptable pathways to the future and to the present, that which is paved with human rights, universal, indivisible. And there is only one acceptable destination, the sustainable dignity of all persons as right holders. The singular surety on the road ahead is that none of that is assured. Therefore, our question to the world is, what will human rights mean, need, and manifest in such a world of turmoil? And this is where the ICJ decisions plays a role. This is where this initiative is so critically important, because for this world to take rights holder at its center, we need something to happen. We need many things to happen. We've heard about some of them. I just want to focus on one thing that is often neglected. We need international law to adapt to this world of uncertainty and fears and transformation. And right now, it has not done so. We are living under an international legal system that is built and based on the 19th century's categories. That is no longer appropriate. That is no longer relevant. That cannot accompany the world of crisis, the world of demand, the world of inequality we must combat. So we need to reshape that international legal system. We need also to rethink and reinvent international human rights law. We need to offer strategic, practical ways of integrating historical injustice into the international legal and accountability prism and mechanism to be fit for the 21st century. International accountability cannot turn its back on the past, but should, on the contrary, fully acknowledge the crimes in our history and the selectivity with which we have sought to address them. Slavery, colonialism, systemic racism, gender inequality, climate injustice. They all call on us to draw the consequences for the future, to build an international society that is fairer. And that is where this ICJ decision, advisory opinion, will be so important. We must integrate the past into, sorry, I was trying to stick to 5 minutes. We must integrate the past into the way we build international law. We need to advance respect for the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, the rights for future generations, as well as rights in respect to other species, to biodiversity, given the threats associated with climate collapse. And that too is something that international law must take at its challenge. That too is what we must ask of international law. We cannot build, we cannot invent, we cannot imagine an international law that does not take into account what has happened in the past and that does not take into account the right that has been recognized now to a healthy environment and the right of other species. I see the ICJ advisory opinion as propulsing the world towards really understanding what the international legal system must be in order to address the death of that boy, in order to provide for a better future and a better present in order to enshrine our rights and rights holder into an international legal system that makes sense for the world we live in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agnès. So I'd like to introduce our final speaker today, who comes with, well, there are some people who have been in this process for very long, fighting this battle for a very long time. And in that time period, there have been some inspirational moments. And Yeb Saño, who is now the executive director of Greenpeace Southeast Asia, inspired activists. How many years ago, Yeb, now in Warsaw, when you stood up and said, how many? 9 years? 9 years ago, when Yeb stood up and challenged governments and all of us and said, if not now, then when? If not us, then who? And commenced with a fast and was joined by thousands of activists in a fast for climate action. So it is absolutely, really an honor to have you back here. I'm sure you're probably wondering why, but we are really happy to have you back in the space and to join us in this side event that really deals with the issues that you had raised so sharply so many years ago in relation to climate justice, our struggle for climate justice and ensuring that. And the Paris Agreement, of course, is meant to promote ambition, and we know where we stand on the levels of ambition, and we come into this COP with a real problem that we are on a path to, in fact, a 2.3 or even 2.5 degree world with current commitments made by government. And this advisory opinion could help strengthen the levels of ambition, Yeb. And so I'd really like to hear from your perspective as Greenpeace, especially how you think this advisory opinion can in fact strengthen the ambition and the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and particularly also regulate the fossil fuel industry, the key drivers of the climate crisis. Yeb, I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Tasneem. Dear friends, colleagues, fellow defenders of people's rights and that of the planet, good afternoon to all of you. It's a distinct honor for me to be addressing you today, especially together with this distinguished panel. Isn't it really great to be in a panel in a room full of people who are friends on the right side of history? We stand at a moment in history with great moral consequence. When we talk about the climate emergency, the most climate-impacted communities deeply understand the manifestation of its impacts: rising sea levels, devastating storms, massive floods, loss of lives, loss of homes, loss of cultures. What is most heartbreaking is that those who suffer the most from this crisis are those who contributed the least to the root of this problem. I will recall that in 2015, about a year and a half after Super Typhoon Haiyan devastated the Philippines, and a few months before the Paris Climate Summit, I went on a special journey to pay homage to the most impacted communities around the world. And I found myself in this lovely city called Port Vila in Vanuatu in the Pacific Islands. in the aftermath of severe tropical cyclone Pam, one of the worst disasters in Vanuatu's history, I saw with my own eyes the profound impacts of this crisis on the people of Vanuatu and the Pacific Islands. And it rekindled that pain that I felt when Typhoon Haiyan devastated my own country. More than you will all probably ever know, my country, there's so much connection between my country and Vanuatu as we embark on this new journey to bring climate justice and human rights, the world's biggest issue, to the world's highest court. It was during my visit to Vanuatu that we drew inspiration from the peoples of the Pacific Islands. We heard their stories, we witnessed their grief, but we saw their courage. And that led to the filing of the first of its kind climate justice and human rights case with the Philippine Commission on Human Rights in 2015. So please extend my warmest regards to President Vurobaravu, to the government of Vanuatu. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your courage in bringing the voices of the people of Vanuatu and many others to the International Court of Justice and rallying a huge number of countries to support this campaign. You know, while nations attempt to avoid the unmanageable, I think that's called mitigation, or to manage the unavoidable, which is adaptation, the international community needs clarity of purpose, and this campaign is a beacon of hope that has the power to breathe new life into these talks, that could breathe new life into the multilateral negotiations and into international cooperation, my dear friends. Vanessa, your work on standing up for the marginalized has a big role in this whole journey that we're all in. And I absolutely agree with you when you say that the most climate impacted communities are on the front lines, but not on the front page. And that is the truth. Climate impacts are profoundly infringing on the human rights of millions of people, yet they have little recourse for them to change their circumstances. Agnès, I have followed your journey for many years, and not just on the human rights context of my country, the Philippines. You've had a lot of adventures there. But with your conviction to connect climate and human rights, and that has inspired us no end. What we want is to feel safe. What we want is to have enough food on the table, to be able to sleep at night soundly, to have homes that are safe. What we want is decent livelihoods. What we want is to be able to pass our culture to future generations, to realize our dreams. Freedom from fear, freedom from want. These are basic human rights, so basic that it leads us to question why they are so elusive. So from a tiny classroom in the Pacific Island students fighting climate change, to the world stage, the nation of Vanuatu, alongside over 1,500 civil society groups, is leading the change to take human rights impacts to the International Court of Justice, seeking an advisory opinion that could help inform the development of international law and force governments, most importantly, to consider human rights impacts of climate policy, which would compel, and I hope it would compel, more ambitious action under the Paris Agreement. And this should manifest in tighter regulations and removing the social license of the fossil fuel industry, and find that kind of ambition in NDCs. I would not elaborate on what we're asking from the ICJ. Christopher has already done that for us. But I want to just emphasize that we're asking the ICJ to clarify the legal consequences of significantly harming the climate system and people. So this campaign for an advisory opinion has generated so much excitement, so much global support, and it stands on the precipice of a historic vote at the UN General Assembly. We must celebrate that, and we must secure a majority of votes to have it referred to the ICJ. This is a campaign that was born in the Pacific, but has traveled all over the world, as we have heard earlier, gathering supporters from the global north and south alike, and is now set to come of age in the UNGA. For those who have not yet supported this, you are increasingly conspicuous for your position on the wrong side of history. And then allow me to draw some parallels with the Philippine human rights case, the climate justice case we filed, which we won. The Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines found that climate change is a human rights issue. It also found that states have the obligation to address climate change and human rights through international law. And the role of the world's biggest polluters, the carbon majors, investor-owned companies, respondents to the case we filed, the Commission found that they can be held legally liable for their willful obfuscation of climate science, and that their acts to delay, derail, and obstruct the energy transition is immoral, and it is immoral, my dear friends. And the case has also strongly integrated climate law with human rights law. Now we have Vanuatu's call on the ICJ. And having all of these journeys intersect with each other is truly inspiring, and the strength of the communities behind this is giving us renewed courage. All nations must stand shoulder to champion the advisory opinion at the ICJ. And here at COP27, world leaders need to step up, be real leaders, act like real leaders, and vote yes at the UNGA. So climate justice, my dear friends, finally, to close, isn't just about acknowledging the harm. It's about systemic transformation to give people back their due. Taking those most responsible for climate harms and human right harms to account, and bringing dignity back into people's lives. And I borrow the words and paraphrase Nelson Mandela, overcoming the climate crisis is not a gesture of charity. It is an act of justice. It is the protection of a fundamental human right, the right to dignity, the right to a decent life. Now, one of the most striking aspects of this climate justice journey for many of us is that justice will not be served on a platter for us. We will have to claim it, and that means taking back our power. And as my good friend Tasneem and many others have been resounding in this conference, there is no climate justice without human rights, and we will not be defeated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yeb, for that inspiration and, in fact, I would say agitation. You're calling on us to use our power to ensure that our governments, who have not yet joined their support to this advisory opinion resolution, and to vote in the UNGA and to be on the right side of history. So let's use our power. Thank you for that challenging agitation, Yeb. We now have heard from the panelists, and we would like to hear from you. So we have a bit of time to, in fact, have your contributions heard, your questions heard, and I would like to now call on you to put up your hands and speak. Please introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Aloha kako. My name is David Foreman. I'm from the University of Hawaii. I have a question for our colleague from France in my role as a member of the Normandy Chair for Peace. But before I say that, I'd like to acknowledge Vanessa Nakate. I've already shared some of your words with the folks back home in Hawaii. I think it'll be very meaningful for them. And Yeb Sano, I've always been a huge fan of yours as the son of a Pinai. And so it's a pleasure to be here. Dr. Bartlett, I've already thanked you for your wonderful commitment to this issue. But Madam, you mentioned the need to integrate the past in the interpretation of history. And I'm wondering if you think that extends back through the Treaty of Westphalia and the compromise that led to the agreement on permanent natural sovereignty or national self-determination over the rights of indigenous peoples, and whether folks that are supporting this movement and Stop Ecocide should also support the resolution adopted by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature last year, calling for renunciation of the doctrine of discovery from the 15th century. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take a round of questions. Over there.
Hello, I'm Emmanuel Musuyu from DRC. I'm working for a coalition of NGOs for the monitoring of reforms and public action. Essentially, now we are working for the monitoring of some project in DRC, maybe a Inga Dam and the project of exploitation of wine. But what I need to say is, firstly, to congratulate every panelist, because you are wonderful with your speech, and I agree with all of your speech, maybe. But a big question that I have to ask now is about what we are doing. Now we are at 27 COP. Anytime we are talking about what we know, we need change, we need to see government to go to the action. But in the countries or in the areas, we can see that government do the same thing. Maybe like in DRC now, you can see people suffering concerning the big dam, the big project of dam. But you will see the DRC government need to go forward with the construction of Great Inga, you know. But if we construct this project, peoples will continue to be in the sufferance like in the past. Other example is about the government is launched one call of thunder to exploit while 27 blocks of oil and 3 blocks of gas. You know, we all in this room, we know the impact of exploitation of oil. But anytime you need to go forward, and we need to see them to close, yeah, to go to the action for the protection of climate. But my question is, what we have to do exactly? Because we know we say anything, but there is no change. What we have to do exactly as activists, and that is my preoccupation.
Thank you very much. There's a hand in the back.
Hi, I'm Tenzin Chuki from Tibet Watch. I'm here part of a Tibetan unofficial delegation, of course, because it remains under occupation. So because we talked about the wrong side of history, that directly relates to the country I am from. And because, you know, we're also talking about justice, and Tibet is warming 2 to 4 times faster than the global average. I'm wondering, and also because colonization exacerbates the policies that destroy our world, what can the governments do to address frontline countries like Tibet, which is the source of water to Asia? It's the water tower of Asia. And it's sort of like you know, like a planetary, like an island in the sky, if you will, the hot air that go up to the sky, and Tibet is at an elevation of average like 4,000 meters above sea level. But we don't have a single Tibetan from inside Tibet, environmental defenders, human rights defenders, people who demand freedom and justice here, because even sending a single message to their relatives in exile are under risk of getting detained and tortured. So I say this as a researcher as well, because people are sometimes very condescending that because I look Tibetan, because I am Tibetan, I am incurably biased. But I have received reports of people getting detained and killed because of that. So what can the governments do to really address that the model, the economic model that the Chinese government is replicating across the world, you know, are also related to the resources extracted from Tibet? So apologies for the long question, but yeah, thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much. And we have a hand over here. Yeah.
My name is Shaimay Al-Assas, CEO of Water and Development Association that we have observer. I'm from Egypt. I want to talk about our association, Water and Development for Local Communities and Human Rights. We are working on capacity building for youth, and we have project to support 1,000 of youth. I want to talk about the space that we have in Egypt. I'm a non-profit organization, not related to the government, but I should to say it. We should to unite our voice. We meet for all, not for one. This is our message. We meet for all in this COP27, not for one. Please respect my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we do the last one for this round?
Hello, my name is Ana Rocha. I'm the executive director of an organization called Nipe Fagio in Tanzania, and I'm here with Gaia, which is the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. My question is, how can we use the court, because we talked here about the biggest polluters and keeping them accountable through the courts, but how can we also use that to keep accountable the international financing associations and institutions that finance solutions that contribute to the climate crisis, and also to the autocratic governments that don't actually listen to the populations and don't actually allow us to do things in a different way? So can this mechanism be used for that as well, and how?
Thanks. Ajit, there was one hand over there. Did you see the hand? And that's the last hand.
Thank you so much. My name is Regan, a climate justice activist from Uganda, a member of Rise Up movement formed by Vanessa Nakate, seated in front of you. Mine is not a question, it is a suggestion and a recommendation. Currently, I'm at the university law school back in Uganda, and I'm a student of international law. So we have had so many COPs, and every COP we have had signing of agreements and treaties, so which have not taken us anywhere. They have not taken us far. And we have seen that since the drafting of all these treaties, about 1.6 trillion US dollars have been invested in fossil fuels by world banks and world leaders and Western economies. So meaning these treaties don't have believers. These are just marriages whereby couples and parties to such treaties lack believers. They don't believe in such treaties, and yet the planet is burning. So my recommendation here today, I recommend that we have a strong and durable international climate treaty where every party and the whole world, the whole planet believes in the treaty, and this treaty can take us somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, are you taking a last hand?
Would you like to ask the question? Yeah.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm from the Philippines. My question is, yes, it is inspiring to listen to the people who are asserting and defending their rights, but it is also perspiring. It is also exhausting to always the burden of claiming the rights, the burden of protecting our rights is on the people in the communities instead of, it is the duty of the regulators or the state. Why is it always like that? And we are tired of that already because it is the government, it is the state that is should have the duty to protect our communities against this fossil fuel and against these impacts of climate change. So I'm Derek Cabe from the Coal-Free Nuclear and Nuclear-Free Bataan Movement, Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, thanks for those questions and thanks for recommendations and thanks for observations. What I suggest is we go through each of you and you identify the questions. You've been identified, but where there's not been an identification, you select the questions that you would like to respond to. And we can all do that. Christopher.
Well, thank you for all the questions, and thank you also for the support, being here and talking about this issue. The International Court of Justice is going to provide clarity on the legal obligations that all states have. And I just wanted to make reference to my colleagues in Tibet, in Egypt, in DRC, that those obligations also apply to those states. Vanuatu found it very difficult when we were producing this NBC because we realized that we also have to uphold those international obligations. This is not just for the historical emitters. We all have to protect human rights. And that meant that we had to step up in the activities that the state took to protect human rights. It meant that in 2022, the government of Vanuatu had to allocate 15% of its recurrent budget to address the impacts of climate change. Here, we're talking about finance for loss and damage, and we're fighting over pennies. Vanuatu put 15% of its budget to address the impacts of climate change. So those types of obligations. We also have to now realize that we have failed in the creation of our own laws, our domestic laws and policies. So this is a process that every single state will have to undergo when the advisory opinion guides us all. So it's not just about what they must do, it's what we all must do, including states that don't necessarily have the best record in protecting human rights or taking action for youth or protecting women. So this, I think, is a really important point to consider. I also want to recall that this year has been a year where I have heard unprecedented requests for upholding the rule of international law. States have come out of the woodwork who very rarely talk about international law to condemn states that right now are clearly breaking international law. Let's hold all states to account for upholding the rule of international law. If ever there was a time, in this time of great uncertainty, it is international law that is going to keep us safe on this planet. And climate change law, climate change obligations exist in the laws that we have ratified. If you look at the law of the sea, there are legal consequences for causing significant harm to the ocean. If you look at the Convention on the Rights of the Child, there are legal enforceable obligations for causing harm to children. If you look at the Women's Bill of Rights, CEDAW, there are legally enforceable obligations for protecting the rights of women. It's time to apply those obligations to climate change in all nations, not to divide us, but to bring us together.
Thank you. Thanks, Christopher. Vanessa?
Yeah, there's a question on why is responsibility put on communities, and I can say it's the same thing that so many young activists face. They feel this whole responsibility of taking care of the planet, and it's because many times young people are told that they are inspiring or they're going to save the world, and it puts a lot of burden and a lot of responsibility. And honestly, what can young people do when they don't hold the reins of power yet? So I think we just have to keep directing the responsibility to where it belongs when it's given to us, and also, you know, playing a role in voting the right leaders who will ensure that they take the responsibility to protect our planet. And also there was a question on holding financial institutions accountable. I think that, you know, it's important to not only hold business and government leaders accountable, but also financial institutions like banks or insurance, you know, companies, because when it comes to the, you know, construction or investments in fossil fuel infrastructure, it's usually, you know, banks and insurance companies that provide the necessary financial services to have these pipelines or coal power plants constructed. So we also have to hold financial institutions accountable.
Thank you, Vanessa. Agnès?
Thank you very much. I think the example from Tibet is a clear demonstration that there cannot be climate justice without human rights. There cannot be climate justice where there is no freedom of expression, freedom of information, freedom of association, freedom to dissent, freedom to research, freedom to work with communities affected by climate change, freedom to travel, to report to the international community about what is happening in their own communities and their own countries, where all of those rights are violated, where there is fear, repression, and silencing. Everybody, including in this gathering and beyond that gathering, does not get the necessary information to make good policy decision. You know, we are here talking about climate crisis in the midst of a human rights crisis, and makes no mistake about it. The human rights crisis in this country is preventing any kind of good evidence-based response to the climate crisis that vulnerable communities of these countries are confronting. And of course, beyond. The same is happening in Tibet. That's, you know, the ICJ decisions, I hope, is going to make those linkages even clearer and stronger, even though they are already embedded in law, in international law. But nevertheless, it is so crucial to keep hammering the fact that without human rights, the search for climate justice is going to hit a wall sooner or later in every one of our countries. If our rights are not respected, there will be no climate justice. It's just that simple. And frankly, the path right now in terms of rights holding doesn't look good at all. So our capacity to work together and to understand how they intertwine with one another is going to make us stronger, and is going to make the governments who are refusing to respond adequately to the climate crisis and to the human rights crisis, they will have to understand we are not defeated, like was said. The second dimension, which is not well understood in international law, is what comes out of historical harms. So we're talking a lot about current harms, and yes, that's absolutely crucial. And in many ways, we have a bit more tools to respond to the current harms. We can, I mean, it takes resources and a lot of other things. But currently, we have the legal capacity to hold a corporate actor to account for their current harms of communities. I'm not saying it's easy. There is a lot that comes into play, but I'm talking about the legal framework. It's far more difficult to hold the government to account for harming the environment 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or even more. And I hope that the ICJ advisory opinion will start breaking the, the difficult legal barriers towards making a connection between current harm and historical actions, mostly by industrialized Western states, the great polluters, as we call them. There are some movement in that direction around reparation for slavery. We need to build on those and extrapolate from those and imagine what it would look like in terms of reparation for past climate action that have harmed the environment to such an extent that communities in many parts of the world now are suffering from those actions taken more than a century ago. So that is where I hope the ICJ advisory opinion will start going. It's new, it's groundbreaking, it's difficult, it's going to be super challenging, but that is also where we've got to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agnès. And Yeb?
Yes, thank you, Tasneem. I would start by saying I commiserate with all of our friends in the most impacted communities who feel that our agency is not always clear, and the frustration that we all feel, and that burden falling on us. And I've been in this process for a long time, as you said earlier. We asked the question 9 years ago, if not now, then when? That fell on deaf ears. So there is no silver bullet to solving the climate crisis. There is no silver bullet to ensuring that the most vulnerable are protected. It will take a systemic transformation of the entire world. We have to question the global economic order in order to do that. We have to painstakingly organize. We have to do that difficult work. And it's not easy because we have to build counterpower. We have to build agency in places that matter most. We have to erode the social license of industries that damage the planet and damage people's lives. So when we talk about the duty bearers for protecting human rights, very few of these duty bearers are fulfilling their roles. And I believe that this whole campaign to have the ICJ issue an advisory opinion could be, as we said already, a beacon of hope. And a beacon of hope means it's also a leap of faith, but we have to believe that it can have the power to change things, that it can have the power to effect change. And so there's nothing really I can say to remove the pain of people who feel pain, especially our good friend from the Philippines here. They've lost friends and loved ones, brutally murdered as they campaign against the fossil fuel industry. And it will not be easy. We will have to use those reasons that make us lose sleep at night to push us out of bed in the morning. And the revolution will not be easy. The revolution is not a walk in the park. And that means we must use all of the tools at our disposal to connect to each other, to strengthen the movement and build solidarity like we've never ever done before. Solidarity like we've never ever done before. This is the most connected generation across continents. We can connect in seconds. When I started as a young activist, we didn't even have mobile phones. I had to go to a friend's house to discuss things and organize. We must use these tools at our disposal and maximize the opportunities that's in front of us. It will not be easy, but as long as we stand in solidarity and with each other and together create that momentum, I think we will never be defeated.
Thank you very much, Yeb. Can we please give our panelists a round of applause? Thank you. So we've clearly heard what we need to do. When we leave here, this side event, we've got work to do at this COP. When we leave the COP, we've got work to do back home. And as all the speakers have said, we are on the right side of history. We need to use our solidarity, our love, our energy, our courage, our compassion to make sure that we get this resolution across the line at the UNGA. That's going to take all of us. But you are not alone. We are here together. I did not introduce myself at the start, and that was a miss of me. My name is Tasneem Essop, and I'm the Executive Director of CAN International. And I introduce myself now because I'm from South Africa. We fought for our freedom against apartheid for many, 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 many years. And when I was a young activist, we never thought we would see our freedom. We knew we needed to fight, and we never knew that we're going to actually see the freedom that we were fighting for. Not in our lifetimes, but we kept on going. And we understood that solidarity, the work we did together back home, but what gave us our energy and our courage was the fact that we had international solidarity for our movement. We are in a space now where the world is fundamentally moving along the lines of apartheid at different levels. The climate crisis has actually forefronted that apartheid in the world. And so we have a struggle against this form of new apartheid in the world, where Global South, as Vanessa had described, are living these crises on a daily basis. And in other parts of the world, the drivers of the crisis exist. And it also exists with fossil fuel industries who are subsidized, who are supported, who are still being expanded. In our days of struggle for freedom, we always said, an injury to one is an injury to all. So we fight for the all, but if we are not capable of having compassion and fight for the one, then we lose the overall struggle in our fight for the all. We must stand for one, and we must stand for all, because an injury to one is an injury to all. And we have the compassion and the courage to stand behind that principle. So I want to thank again, well, firstly, the youth in the Pacific for this initiative. And Christopher, please pass on our thank you for the leadership of Vanuatu on a number of fronts that we've heard today from you. And let me please thank all of civil society that has put their weight behind this initiative. We will succeed. We will succeed. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming.